I spoke to a young man recently who was campaigning to repeal the Vagrancy Act of 1824. It is an act of Parliament of the United Kingdom that makes it an offence to sleep rough or beg. It remains in force in England and Wales, and anyone found to be sleeping in a public place or trying to beg for money can be arrested. This act was introduced following the Napoleonic Wars. It has made the lives of people sleeping rough on the streets of Britain even more difficult. Dayne spoke to me about his experiences, how he ended up homeless, how he got out of it, and his endeavour to repeal this cruel act. So Dwayne, thanks so much for speaking with me. Can you
Thanks very much
can you
having me.
yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, that's a tough one. How do you sum up a person? I think that the relevant bit, I guess, is the sort of 9 years that I was homeless for. So I became homeless at 15. It was just shortly before I was 16, in that just between taking my GCSE exams and getting my results, just due to family breakdown that was partly my fault, partly my parents, and it really doesn't matter whose fault it was. It was just a sort of thing. I'd had no experience of kind of the homeless system before that, obviously. And I had no real experience of things like the benefit system, and no real guide posting or anything that helped. I'm sure we'll go over some more sort of details of the time that I was actually homeless for. But these days I'm 31, and I have a house that I like, and very little risk of becoming homeless again. I work as a platform engineer for the NHS these days.
Very good. Can you tell us some about, maybe before we get into more details about yourself, just maybe we can talk about some of the issues surrounding homelessness at the moment. Like, what are some of the common misconceptions surrounding homelessness?
Oh, there's a load of ones that because I don't want to just particularly talk about my own experience. Obviously, that's where my relevance comes from. But I've got a lot of people I've spoke to and a lot of stories I've kind of known. And the one that really comes up lots is that it's because of drugs. In my experience, the drugs usually come after the homelessness. If you become homeless, it's very easy to slip into drugs. I certainly, I think I tried cannabis before I became homeless, but that was as close as I'd come to drugs, compared to when you're in a shelter. There's drugs everywhere. Usually the drugs are a way of coping with the situation. They're not what got you there. Another one is that people refuse help, and that means that they're not really homeless. And I've been told this, that I'm faking it, because I won't go back to somebody's house and sleep on their sofa like they're offering. After all, you're homeless. Why won't you come and sleep on my sofa? If it hasn't happened to you, stories of people that have taken these offers and ended up stabbed or robbed or raped, or for most homeless people I know, there's at least one or multiple of those have happened when they've accepted offers of help. You become mistrustful. You don't really want to take offers that involve you being on your own and things like that. You feel safe because there's people around you, rather than feeling safe because there's walls around you to keep you safe. So some people will think, well, it's more safe in a house than it is out here on the streets, where anything could happen on the streets. It's completely flipped the other way around. And one other one that's a really common misconception is, he's got a smartphone or something like that, so he can't be homeless. Well, I was homeless from about, what were the dates? Around 2005 to about 2014, during which time the smartphone revolution happened. And despite that, for most of that time, I had some kind of smart device. Even before smartphones came out, I had one of the phones that I could access the full web on, because that was kind of important if I didn't have access to anything else. I'd obviously grown up in the sort of technological age of having the internet and things, and being able to access things on the web was a big difference. You can charge things in the library and things like that. They're I guess the kind of misconceptions that I come across most. But the kind of case or the cause that I'm trying to really push at the moment is about the Vagrancy Act.
Can you tell us? Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, this is one that few people know of, and those that know of it know why. No charity that works with homeless people supports keeping the act. There's been a campaign to get rid of it for so many years now. I think since 2018 it's been a really important case. But the only reason it doesn't seem to be getting repealed is for lack of public consciousness, which is really why I contacted you and why I'm so thankful that you helped me get this message out. The Vagrancy Act of 1824 makes it illegal to be homeless in all sense. It does that in two ways. It makes it illegal to sleep in a public place, and it makes it illegal to gather alms, basically to beg for money. But it's not talking about begging for money in terms of, harassing people and being a public nuisance, which come under, more modern laws than an early 19th century law that was introduced to get rid of all of the influx of soldiers after the Napoleonic Wars who, came back with limbs missing and became destitute. That was essentially why this law was introduced. We have more modern laws to deal with problematic people if we want to these days. This act is used, for example, I used to sleep in a little alleyway. I could send you a picture. I actually found it on Street View the other day, so I could send you a link if you wanted, of the alleyway that I used to sleep in. And I used to sleep there because there was a street light, and I mentioned this to a few people recently. And I used to, read by that street light, and that was essentially why I was there. And if I got seen sitting there reading my book, then I would get moved, because I looked homeless and somebody could come and give me money. So that was me sitting there trying to gather alms from people under the Vagrancy Act. Essentially, looking homeless is illegal and going to sleep is illegal. So if you try and sleep somewhere, you get moved. At first, it wasn't used all that much when I first became homeless, but it picked up quite quickly. And before long, most people know people. Most nights you get moved on by some police officer telling you to move.
Can I ask where would they move you to? Would they actually take you to a shelter, or would they just say get out of this area?
No, there's no signposting. There's not really places for them to send you to. Some of them don't really know the system, so they'll have a chat with you and try and advise you on places to go. But you know the system more than them, and you know that you've tried the places that they're advising, but they still need you to move on. There are, not all cops are bad, not all cops are good. There's good people and bad people in every job, and you've got the ones that would come by and kind of say, okay, you've got 10 minutes to move, or I'll have to arrest you under the Vagrancy Act, give you a wink and never come back. And you know full well that they were just letting you stay there, but they needed to tell you to move on. Some were a lot more problematic. There was ones that drove you out of town and then de-arrested you, leaving you with a day's walk back to wherever you were from, essentially wherever you lived, because you needed to be in the town centres, because that's where all the resources were. Otherwise, every time you needed to access anything, you would need to do long walks either way. It ends up making the police the enemy. It really does.
And who at the moment is attempting to repeal this act? Is it just charities that are campaigning against it, or are there also politicians?
There's a few politicians that have been doing a lot for it. There's I've got the names up there because I was remembering this one. So there's Elida Moran, who I apologise for getting the names wrong, but she's a Lib Dem MP that's introduced to her private members bill that would repeal it. It had its first reading back in early March or mid-March. And the reason the campaign's so important at the moment is because the government isn't quite, they seem like they're backing out of their earlier commitments to give it the time in Parliament to pass. And if the government doesn't decide to give it the time to have its second read, it doesn't matter if every MP would vote for it, it doesn't pass. And it's such a close stage, having passed its first reading, and given that there's very little opposition to actually repealing it, the only thing that seems to be holding it back is a lack of public awareness and the public just not being aware of it as being an issue.
So in that way, it's not
one more. Nikki Aiken. I should add her as well. She's a Tory. My point there is that it's not a party political issue. There's the Labour Socialist MPs group. They've every Queen's Speech, alternative Queen's Speech they put out. They've called for the Vagrancy Act. It's not a party political issue. It goes across party bounds. It just needs that public consciousness, really.
So hopefully we can do that and help it along. Really, yes, because if there was some sort of political resistance to it, that's one thing. But if it's just general apathy, it's another thing.
That does seem to be the case, yeah.
Do you actually see it being repealed in the future, or you're positive about that? Yes.
Yeah, it's a matter of time in that it's been gathering speed since 2018, and as you say there, it's not that there's any opposition to getting rid of it. It's just that it's not a big enough issue for them to really give it the few days in Parliament that it might take to go through all of its readings and its stages and things. It should be a fairly easy bill to pass. There's no police powers that are taken away by getting rid of the Act. There's no real change that happens other than that the homeless people are allowed to go to sleep wherever they want without being harassed for it.
Something you were talking about earlier about how the sense of community is very important in the homeless community, in a sense that it's safer to stay on the street with others than actually go to the home of someone who you don't know, obviously. How does homelessness affect men and women differently?
Well, this is where I have to, because there's a slightly dodgy ground in that most homeless people are male. And the reason for that is that women are prioritised by the council and given places. And a lot of people will backlash against this. And my response would be, honestly, to you, would you really prefer that we were leaving the women out on the streets? Because they do have a much worse time of it. The women that I have known out on the streets are, by the time I've known most of them, rape is just a common thing. It's not a particularly, it's almost a horror that they've got used to. And so, yeah, no, women, children, people in the, struggling more need that help more. I'm not at all saying that I should have received more help than I did. Well, I am, but only because there should be more supply. The problem isn't in terms of that we should all have, that I should have received more help than that. It's just that there should be more supply available to help people.
Could you, if you don't mind, could you tell us about some of the worst experiences you've experienced, the worst events you've had while you were homeless?
I guess one of my worst ones, although it actually didn't end up that bad for me, is when I was kept as a slave. So essentially, my story from my side, all that happened is I was on the streets. I never begged. I could never actually beg, but I would sit in a public place and look homeless. And if people came and gave me money, yay, I needed that for food and things. So I wasn't going to necessarily feel bad about that, but I was never one of the people, I didn't have the confidence to be, can you give me money? So I basically just sit there and look homeless. And while I was doing that in Aylesbury sometime, a person came up to me and essentially offered me work. And I said, yes, sure. You're going to pay me some money and give me some food. Sure, I'll do whatever you want for you. And it was just gardening and stuff like that. And I stayed there for a few days and it just felt weird. They started not wanting me to leave the area that they'd driven me out to this area. Essentially, they were living in a couple of caravans and things like that. And they kept not wanting me to leave the area. They gave me very creepy vibes. And after about a week, I basically just ran. I left everything they gave me such creepy vibes. I left everything I had. Walked such a long way. It literally took me a few days, I think, to get back to anywhere I knew, just basically following the long signs. Found out about a year later that they'd been keeping people for years in cages. This has been a slow thing that they'd started by getting you doing the gardening outside and then controlling you more, and they've been keeping homeless people in cages. There are darker ones that I about me that I really struggle with, that I can't really do with that.
Sure, it's
okay. I was also very fortunate. Ultimately, I'm fortunate in that I am a white male. I certainly, homelessness leads in lots of ways. This might sound like I'm excusing myself, but does in a lot of ways lead to crime. Because you get to a stage where, what are they going to do? Lock me up and put me in a cell? So you're not necessarily, or at least I wasn't necessarily going out and committing crime, but I would also shoplift and things and not really care, because, again, what are they going to do? Put me in a cell and give me food? Crimes that I at least viewed as victimless. So there's plenty of times I ended up in front of courts, either for being drunk and disorderly, or doing drugs, or whatever it was back in those days. And I don't believe that if I hadn't been a relatively well-spoken white male, that I probably would have gone to jail at least one of the times that I was in front of a judge. And my life would have gone very different from there. So I am very lucky.
What are some of the ways people, homeless people are assisted in the UK. So did you receive some sort of assistance, help from shelters or
Yeah.
from or was it from in the sense from the state, or was it basically just from charity?
The state offers its own help in terms of benefits. That's essentially the state's help. If you're under 18 or if you're in a priority group. So when I was under 18, because obviously I was under 18 when I first became homeless, and they were very quick to put me in temporary accommodation, which is essentially very, very expensive accommodation, but the council's paying for it. So great. I was kicked out of the shelter that I was in pretty much the second I became 18. There was a group of us that were around the same age, and as soon as we became 18, they found an excuse to kick us all out. I am imagining that funding changes or something, but guesswork. So there are things like that for there. After that, it depends on the area and not a huge amount. Their response, at least back then, would have been that I could get housing benefit, but most places won't accept DSS, especially when you don't have any kind of deposit. You're clearly not working. There's plenty of reasons why they'll take somebody else over, somebody who's homeless. And obviously finding a job has its own problems in that you don't have an address. I've been fired before for being working. I was actually squatting in a place. So I actually was able to shower and things. I'd followed all the rules. I'd changed the water bills and the electric bills over to my name. It was an empty home and just literally wasn't being used by anyone. Somebody had actually given me the key, so I wasn't breaking and entering either, because that's the other rule. Somebody I worked with had found out that I was sleeping rough and had given me a key to a property that he knew to be empty. And I didn't ask questions. I used the property. But as soon as my workplace found out that I was homeless, I lost my job. So you can end up straight back. Yeah, sorry, to return a bit, I got a little bit off there, but things that are available. There are shelters. There's a few different types of shelters that I've been to in my experience. There's night shelters, which I went to a few nights and didn't go back. I just couldn't. I felt so much safer on the streets than I ever felt in there. It's a very kind of rough area. But it's one of the ones where you turn up at usually about 3 or 4 p.m. and they tell you whether there's a bed for you that night, and then you have to leave by 9 a.m. in the morning. And it's usually a centre that's open during the day, but the bedrooms aren't open. So the idea was that you'd only really get that bed for that night, and you might get a bed the next night. And I always thought that it wasn't worth if I'm going to be on the streets some nights anyway, I'd rather just be on the streets. There are shelters that are more stable. I went into a few. I've lived in 2 or 3. The main problem with them isn't that there's risk to them, because yes, there is, but ultimately living with people, especially some people that are going to have mental health and drug addiction problems, it's going to be a little bit more risky, but that kind of comes with it. And the problem with them is that you can't build a life from that. So I've said to a few people that what you need to escape homelessness is a platform that's stable for a long time. When I escaped homelessness, it took me 15 months of jumping in between weeks here and weeks there with agencies before I got stable work. So you need a fair amount of time to rebuild. And you can't do those from shelters, because either you're going to get moved fairly regularly anyway, but even if you don't, imagine the cost of rent of a property there. You're only paying for a failure room, so the rent isn't that high. But then think of the service charge, because they've got to have security 24/7. They've got to have counsellors and things, and these are supported housing. The idea is they're offering support and counselling and things like that. So there are, of course, lots of additional costs. And I think I worked out that I needed on minimum wage something to be working like 90 hours a week to pay the rent if I got a job in one of the places I was in. So the idea of finding a job, it doesn't work unless you've already got kind of the place to keep you stable. Most help is from charities. Charities are the only real help that's available. There are plenty of food banks and things that are doing their best with limited resources. But yeah, limited resources and a very, very, very stretched, very, very, very stretched.
We're seeing how numbers of people homeless is increasing over the last decade, really. Do you see the situation for people who are homeless getting better or getting worse? I know numbers are increasing, but is it for individuals getting better or worse, in your opinion?
It's getting worse, I believe. Now, I don't have a good. I've obviously not been homeless for about 7 years now. Hopefully, I'll never will be again. So I can't give a first-hand experience on that. And also, I live in a very different area now. I was homeless in the south, and these days I live up in Blyth in Northumberland. So it's a very different place to live in terms of the country. So I don't know. It was getting worse while I was homeless because the use of the Vagrancy Act was just rising and rising and rising and rising. From what I've seen of the figures of its actual use in terms of charges, while I was homeless was the peak, and it's actually fallen since. But I never trust that because I was never arrested under it. So not one of those charges would ever, not one of the things that I ever saw with it will ever show up on any record for it because I was never charged. I was just constantly moved. Those that have been charged have ended up facing, £100 fines. And of course, what do they do with those £100 fines? They're homeless and are begging for money. Well, are they going to stop begging for money because you've given them £100 fine? Eventually, when they can't pay it, it gets taken out of their money, their benefits money, which they were needing to survive. And they need to beg more. They're more desperate. Well, I don't understand how people think that helps the situation. I just don't.
Yeah, you're finding people who don't have money in the first place,
yeah.
and they're using whatever money they have just to survive. They're not wasting the money. They're not using it on things that are not necessary for them. Do you see? What would you like government to do if you could if you had influence over government? What would you like them to do to invest more in public services? Would it be better to repeal the Vagrancy Act? What would you like to see government do in the future to deal with this issue?
Repealing the Vagrancy Act is certainly a initial step, and it's a good thing that we should do right now. If we were going beyond that, then realistically what we need to is to have more council housing that's actually available for people. But that's obviously a problem that I think most people are aware of, is that we lack so much social housing, and that's what makes us limited to those who are most in need, which leaves people like me who aren't the most in need out in the worst conditions. If we were going as far as I would like us to do, I would like us to follow the Finnish system. Now in Finland, they have a homes first policy, which if somebody's homeless, you get them into a stable, full, permanent home first. They are usually able to continue doing drugs and things like that in that if they need to. It's not that they're given this on a condition of X, Y, and Z. They're given a home first, and we deal with the problems afterwards that led to them becoming homeless. That's not only a better policy for homeless people and not only helps homeless people more, it also saves money. It usually costs about, I think the figures say somewhere around £1,500 to rehabilitate a homeless person. It usually costs about £15,000 a year in extra costs keeping somebody on the streets. There's extra walk-in centres and extra medical expenses from somebody who is, living on the streets is not the most hygienic you can be. There's additional cost of temporary accommodation and things like that.
And also policing is a cost as well. You actually, if you take people, if you put them into regular housing, you don't need to have the same police resources where you arrest people, keep them in a cell, and provide services that way. Yes.
So I think they're the best government in terms of public finances, as well as, if you want to help homeless people, that's my reason. But if you want to do it just purely based on the finances, it's financially a better idea for the country. Yeah.
I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?